I wanted to go into the next section now, which was around developer experience.
Yes.
So what were your sort of main takeaways from that section of the report?
Yes, I think kind of quoting this summary report here, they kind of talk about how having a healthy culture can help reduce burnout, increase productivity, and job satisfaction. Again, I think they kind of touched on this quite heavily last year on kind of user centricity. I think all of these themes that we've discussed today are all interrelated, right? Everything sort of ties back to the user at the end of the day, right? And in this case, we're talking about developers, right? Because we're looking to make them or helping them get better at doing their jobs, right? But yeah, I think ultimately I'd argue that DevX is probably one of the most important, maybe underrated capabilities. I think that there needs to be more focus on your developers, making sure that they're happy, right? And that their concerns are being addressed. Because ultimately, they're the ones that are writing the code and developing your solutions, right? If your development team are, not happy, then that will show somewhere along the line, right? Their motivation is going to be low, job satisfaction is going to be low, so the output from your development team is going to be not great. I think, I don't know. In my opinion, being user centric, it is super, super important. And it's not just about developers, right? This applies. You can apply this to any team, department in any organization, right? It's important to understand the needs and wants of each kind of department in order to achieve a common goal, should we say?
Yeah. I think in that section, and I agree with the emphasis you put on developer experience there. I think it's extremely important and it's not always given enough consideration. But I think the thing that stuck out for me, that was slightly surprising, although maybe it shouldn't have been, was the focus on documentation and how important documentation is. And I know they talked about it in last year's report as well, but it seemed in the way they were talking about it that the documentation really is foundational to developer experience and to software delivery performance as well. So they were talking about key aspects like findability of documents and reliability of documents. And I know that's kind of been a big focus that we've had at RiverSafe in the work that we do recently as well. But yeah, I think that's just one thing that I wanted to call out. Is that
documentation really
a lot of people don't give it enough consideration. It's almost an afterthought with some developers, especially when you're under pressure to get features out of the door. You think, oh, I'll come back and I'll do it later, and then you move on to the next thing. But I think it was interesting. They called out, no, actually, it's very important. It's very indicative of performance as well.
100%. I think just kind of going back to your comment on documentation, that feels like a really old problem that still hasn't really been solved. Companies that I've worked in, documentation naturally falls behind, right? People don't keep it up to date, and then it's just you're just building up tech debt essentially with your docs as code. I like to think that AI will start to kind of take that burden away from your developers, so you can have documentation being written by an AI system off the back of your code base, for example, right? So it's always kept up to date. You don't have to kind of worry about it anymore. But yeah, but still, it's really important that your documentation is given the attention that it deserves, because I think in last year's report they made a really interesting observation where obviously a lack of documentation doesn't help your development team, right? but too much of it as well can also have a bad impact.
Overwhelming, isn't it?
It's overwhelming, yeah, exactly. And that I think it was something around documentation and burnout, and it sort of talked about if your documentation is too detailed or too sort of verbose, that can sort of have an impact on burnout, because suddenly your developer is having to really focus on reading this and making sense of it, whereas actually sometimes less is more, right? So it's finding that balance, I think. And that's quite difficult to do, unless you've been writing technical docs for a long time, right? Yeah, interesting. I think, yeah, DevX probably one of the most important themes, I think, in this year's report, and no doubt they'll probably go into it even more in next year's, I bet.
I hope so, because I think it's something that's both very interesting, and in my opinion, at least, not given enough attention still. But following on, so going into the last section in the report, around leading transformations, I think I think it's really interesting to see the report kind of divided up somewhat between technical aspects in AI and platform engineering, and then more sort of soft skills and ways of working types of things in terms of DevOps and transformations. So what were your main takeaways from that section of the report?
Yeah, I think the leadership stuff, we're sort of branching away from the techie side of things, because in order to, there's so many different variables involved, right? In tech, you need to have good leaders, you need to have quality documentation, you need to make sure that management are setting stable kind of goals for the team to achieve, right? As soon as one of those sort of variables starts to become fuzzy, should we say, then that starts to have an impact on your development team. And I think in that section of the report, they talked heavily on prioritizing stability for your users by having concrete sort of goals that management setting for your teams, etc. I think it's definitely another area that deserves attention, I think, because the leadership team in any company can have a massive impact on the way that your team operate, right? It has an impact on the culture and all of that good stuff. So,
and I think the success of any transformation as well in any organization. So, you and I have both seen transformations that for a number of different reasons have failed or not been as successful as they could have done, or they could have been, rather. So I think it's an important call out to say, how important leadership is in that, and how important the things they called out, having a vision, being supportive, recognizing good work, inspirational communications, just some of these things that you kind of almost take for granted and don't think about as much, are actually very important. And I think and I've wrote a sentence down here that really resonated with me, is that transformation is not the destination. Transformation is a journey of continuous improvement. So you can't think of it like a big bang thing, or just say, this is where we're trying to get to, everybody go. You've got to think about how you continuously improve, to get to where you want to go, essentially.
100%. And you just reminded me of something that came up in last year's report, actually, where I think they were talking about chunk-based development and the benefits and whatnot. And there was a comment in there that said it's important that when you view these stats and whatever they've identified, that you don't view them in isolation. You have to really zoom out and take a holistic approach, because all of these stats tell a story, essentially, right? As soon as you drill into one stat, that can tell a completely different story. And when you take a step back, you've got a different picture altogether. Anyway, I'm sort of digressing there. But yeah, going back to the transformational leadership, I'll just quickly cover some of the stats on the report. So they reckon if transformational leadership increases by 25%, you can see a 9.1% increase in job satisfaction, around a 10% decrease in burnout, which is massive. An 8% increase in productivity, team performance, 4% product performance, and 10.3% increase in organizational performance. So that's quite significant, isn't it? How influential leadership and how that can influence the stats, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like you said, it's something that we shouldn't that some people take for granted, right? But it is important that we're aware and continuously improving, like you said. Yeah,
absolutely. So that feels like a good point to wrap up. So I just want to ask, final thoughts. What was your biggest takeaway from the entire report?
I think, if I'm completely honest, the bit I was most interested about was the AI, because it's quite new. People don't really know the value that it's sort of bringing yet, because it's so early days. But yeah, I think AI is going to have a massive positive impact, I'd like to think, on developers. The stats kind of show a very positive correlation in increasing AI by 25%, and the sort of outputs of that. For me, the AI adoption was probably the most interesting part of the report, followed by DevX and then platform engineering, because those two are quite sort of closely coupled. I think an interesting report. I think it was quite lengthy this year's, but it was definitely worth a good read. I love the after at the end of the report, you can see all of the kind of demographics and how they got their data. So that's really interesting. Kind of shows how they're data led and whatnot. Maybe next year I might go to the end of the report and just read up on all the stats first, and then go back and read it end to end.
That might be a good way to do it.
Yeah.
I think for me, again, the biggest takeaway for me was that theme of user centricity again is and just to reiterate again, that technology, including AI, IDP and platform engineering, can only get you so far. If you're not user centric in your approach to using those things, then you're not going to get the potential benefits that they can give. That was really the biggest takeaway from the entire report for me.
Nice. That's really interesting. Thank you, Mark. You can obviously download the report online. Definitely worth recommend you give it a read. There's some really interesting things in there, and things that you can kind of take away to help improve your DevOps and platform engineering and whatnot at your organization. So
Oh, thanks, Pat. That was a really interesting conversation. And if you watching online would like to get involved in the conversation, or just reach out to myself or Patrick to discuss the report or DevOps in general any further, then reach out to us on LinkedIn. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.